My son kicked me out when he found out I lost my job. He said, "No one lives off charity here." But I had a fortune saved, and on Monday, I canceled the deed that had his name on it. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end. And comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My son kicked me out when he discovered I'd lost my job. Nobody lives here for free. Those words still echo in my mind, piercing my heart like shards of glass. I had a fortune saved up, and on Monday I canceled the deed that had his name on it. The morning it all happened started like any other. I was preparing breakfast, the coffee brewing, toast in the toaster. Louis was upstairs getting ready for work, and I was rehearsing how to tell him. After 25 years at Hartman & Associates, I'd been let go. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, they assured me. But at 60, starting over felt impossible. When Louis came downstairs, he was already scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging me as he sat at the kitchen island. I placed his coffee in front of him, black with 1 sugar, just how he liked it. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shakier than I'd intended. He glanced up briefly, his attention still half on his phone. "What is it, Mom?" "I'm running late." I took a deep breath. "I lost my job yesterday. They're downsizing the accounting department." His fingers stopped scrolling. He looked up at me, his expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "What do you mean you lost your job?" His voice was cold, calculating. "They let me go. After 25 years. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to start looking. Right away, but at my age—" "At your age?" he interrupted, standing up abruptly. "That's always your excuse, isn't it? Your age." I stepped back, stunned by his reaction. "Louis, I'm just saying it might take some time." "Time?" His coffee mug hit the counter with a sharp crack. "And who's going to pay the bills while you take your time? Me? Rebecca?" "I have some savings," I started, not revealing just how substantial those savings were. I'd always kept that private, a safety net I'd built over decades of careful planning. "Some savings?" he scoffed. "Enough for what? A month? 2? I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. This was my son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. Now he was looking at me as if I were a burden, a problem to be solved. "This house is in my name now," he continued, his voice rising. "You signed it over to me 3 years ago, remember? I have a mortgage to pay. Rebecca and I have plans." "I know, and I'll contribute. I just need a little time to—" "No." He cut me off again, grabbing his briefcase. "I can't do this, Mom. Nobody lives here for free. Rebecca's been saying for months that we need our space, and she's right. The room seemed to tilt around me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to figure something out. And not here." He wouldn't meet my eyes now. "You have until the end of the week." "The end of the week?" I whispered, disbelieving. "To move out of my own home?" "It's not your home anymore," he said flatly. "It's mine. You signed the papers." I had. I'd put the house in his name after he got married, believing his promises that I would always have a place there, that he would take care of me in my old age, just as I had cared for him. What a fool I'd been. Where am I supposed to go? My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. He shrugged, already heading for the door. "Call one of your friends. Figure it out. I can't be responsible for you anymore." The door closed behind him with a finality that shook me to my core. I stood in the kitchen, my kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd laughed and cried together, and felt like a stranger. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd occupied since Louis was born. I looked at the family photos on the dresser. Louis graduating high school. Louis at his wedding with Rebecca. Louis moving into this house with me after his father died. In every picture, My smile was radiant with pride and love. I took only one photo, an old one of just the two of us when he was about 5, before life hardened him, before money and status and his wife's influence transformed him into the man who could throw his mother out without a second thought. Then I called Margaret, my oldest friend, who immediately insisted I come stay with her. As I packed a small suitcase, I heard the front door open again. Louis was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, his expression a mixture of irritation and something that might have been guilt. "You don't have to leave right this minute," he said, not quite apologetic. I looked at him, really looked at my son, and saw a stranger. "Yes, I do." 2 hours later, I sat in Margaret's spare bedroom, finally allowing the tears to fall. Not just for the home I'd lost, but for the son I no longer recognized. The next morning, I visited my bank. The fortune I'd quietly accumulated over decades, money from my husband's life insurance, from careful investments, from years of saving, was substantial. More than enough to start over. On Monday, I called my lawyer and canceled the deed transfer that had put my house in Louis's name, the house I had paid for, the house where I had raised him alone. The house that he thought gave him the right to throw me away like yesterday's garbage. The lawyer's office was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil I'd been experiencing. Thomas Harrington had been my attorney for over 20 years, handling everything from my husband's will to the deed transfer that had put my house in Louis's name. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Scarlett?" Thomas asked, adjusting his glasses as he looked at me across his polished desk. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been in days. He nodded, sliding the paperwork toward me. "The transfer was conditional anyway. Your son violated the terms when he asked you to leave. I hadn't told anyone about those conditions, not even Louis. When I signed the house over to him, Thomas had insisted on including a clause that guaranteed my lifetime right to reside there. Louis had signed it without reading the fine print, too eager to get the property in his name. As I signed the papers to reclaim my home, memories washed over me, bitter and sweet in equal measure. 28 years ago, after James died of a sudden heart attack, I was left alone with a 7-year-old son and a mountain of debt I hadn't known existed. James had been the financial manager in our marriage, handling all our money matters while I raised Louis and worked part-time. After his death, I discovered he'd been gambling, taking out loans, mortgaging our future. The modest life insurance policy was just enough to pay off the most pressing debts, leaving me with almost nothing. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table night after night, bills spread out before me, trying to figure out how to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I took a full-time position at Hartman & Associates, though it paid barely enough to cover our basic expenses. In the evenings, I worked as a bookkeeper for several small businesses in our neighborhood. On weekends, I did tax returns during season and tutored high school students in math. I worked myself to exhaustion year after year. "Mom, why do you have to work all the time?" Louis would ask, his young face drawn in disappointment when I missed another school event, or had to leave him with a neighbor while I took on extra shifts. "So we can have a good life," I would tell him, hugging him. "Close. So you can have opportunities." And he did have opportunities. I scrimped and saved to put him in the best schools. I helped him with homework late into the night, no matter how exhausted I was. I attended every parent-teacher conference, arranged for extra tutoring when he struggled with reading, celebrated every achievement no matter how small. When Louis was accepted to Westlake University, I took out a second mortgage on the house to help pay his tuition. When he wanted to study abroad in his junior year, I sold my mother's jewelry, the only valuable things I had left from my own past. "You don't need to do that, Mom," he'd said, though not very convincingly. "I want to," I had assured him. "This is what mothers do." All those years, I was also quietly building my safety net. I set aside a portion of every paycheck, no matter How small. I invested cautiously but consistently, following the advice of financial newsletters I studied religiously. I lived frugally, denying myself new clothes, vacations, even needed dental work, so that every spare penny could go towards securing our future, Louis's future, and my own retirement. When Louis graduated and landed his first job at a prestigious financial firm, I was bursting with pride. My sacrifices had paid off. My son would have the life I had always wanted for him. "You'll never have to worry about money the way I did," I told him at his graduation dinner. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't tell him about my secret savings, which by then had grown substantial. 3 years ago, Louis approached me with the idea of transferring the house into his name. "It makes financial sense, Mom," he explained, showing me spreadsheets and tax calculations. "You're getting older, and this way, we can avoid estate complications later. Plus, Rebecca and I can start building equity." It had seemed reasonable at the time. Louis promised I would always have a home with them. "I'll take care of you, Mom, just like you took care of me," he had said, his hand on mine, his eyes sincere. I believed him. I trusted my son. Now, sitting in Thomas's office, I realized how completely I had been deceived. Not just by Louis, but by my own wishful thinking. My desperate desire to believe that my sacrifices had produced a son who would honor and care for me. "The paperwork will be filed today," Thomas said, bringing me back to the present. "Your son will be legally notified by tomorrow afternoon." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and determination. "Thank you." "Scarlett," Thomas said, hesitating. "There's something else. I've been managing your investments for 20 years now, as you know." "Yes, and doing a wonderful job," I replied. "Your portfolio has performed exceptionally well. With the recent tech sector boom, your holdings have nearly doubled in value this past year alone." I blinked, surprised. I checked my statements regularly, but I hadn't realized the extent of the growth. "The bottom line," Thomas continued, "is that you're worth considerably more than you might realize. Over $2 million to be precise." The figure hung in the air between us. $2 million. More money than I had ever dreamed of having. "Does Louis know?" Thomas asked quietly. "No," I whispered. "No one knows." As I left the lawyer's office, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt strangely light. The weight of betrayal was still there, but underneath it was something new, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in decades. My phone buzzed in my purse. Louis's name flashed on the screen. I silenced it without answering. Whatever he wanted to say, it would have to wait. For the first time in his life, Louis would have to wait for me. Margaret's cozy guest room had become my sanctuary over the past week. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone as it buzzed for the 12th time that morning. Louis again. After ignoring his calls for 3 days, curiosity finally got the better of me. I picked up, "Mom." His voice was smooth, controlled, his business voice. "I've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," I replied, matching his tone. "We need to talk." A pause. "There seems to be some confusion about the house." I almost laughed. Confusion. What a convenient word for someone who'd just discovered they weren't getting what they thought was theirs. "No confusion, Louis. The house is mine. It always was." "Mom," his voice tightened slightly, "you signed that house over to me. We had an agreement." "Yes, we did," I said calmly. "The agreement included my right to live there. You broke that agreement when you told me to leave." The silence on the other end was brief but telling. He hadn't read the paperwork closely enough. "Look," he finally said, his voice softening into something more conciliatory. "I was upset. I didn't mean you had to leave permanently. I was just stressed about finances with you losing your job." "Were you?" I asked. Because nobody lives here for free seemed pretty clear to me. Another pause. I could almost see him recalibrating, adjusting his approach. Louis had always been good at that, finding the right angle, the right words to get what he wanted. Why? Don't you come home and we can discuss this properly? He suggested, his voice now warm, concerned. Rebecca misses you. We both do. Rebecca. The woman who had smiled when he told me to leave. The woman who had been redecorating my bedroom before. I'd even packed my bags. I'm actually quite comfortable at Margaret's, I said. Mom, be reasonable. Louis's voice hardened again. That house is in my name. I have the mortgage. You've had the mortgage for 3 years, Louis. I paid it for 25 before that. And if you check with Thomas, you'll find the deed transfer has been reversed. Silence again, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. You can't do that. I already have. I'll fight this, he warned. You can try, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. But you might want to read the fine print first. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly despite my steady voice. It was the first time in my adult life I'd stood up to anyone like that, least of all my own son. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was Rebecca. I declined the call. A text followed. Scarlett, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. Louis was just stressed. You know how much we love having you here? Love having me there? Rebecca had spent the last 5 years making it clear I was an inconvenience. From accidentally scheduling dinner parties when I had bridge club to redecorating the living room without consulting me, removing all the family photos in favor of her modern art. I didn't respond to her text. Instead, I called Thomas. They've been notified, he confirmed. And as expected, they're not happy. Louis has already contacted his own attorney, but there's not much they can do. The conditional clause in the transfer was quite clear. What happens now? I asked. Legally? They have 30 days to vacate the property unless you reach another agreement. 30 days. The thought of forcing Louis and Rebecca out of the house brought me no joy, despite everything. That house was filled with memories, both good and bad. I wasn't even sure I wanted to live there anymore. There's something else, Thomas said, interrupting my thoughts. Louis's attorney mentioned something about financial hardship. It seems your son may be in some financial trouble. This surprised me. Louis had always appeared successful, with his expensive suits and Rebecca's luxury car. What kind of trouble? He didn't specify, but reading between the lines, I'd say significant. It might explain his reaction to your job loss and to losing the house. After hanging up, I sat in Margaret's sunlit kitchen, thinking about what Thomas had said. If Louis was in financial trouble, his panic at my job loss made more sense. He wasn't just being cruel, he was afraid. That didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me understand it. My phone buzzed again. A text from Louis. Mom, please, we need to talk in person. It's important. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The Cafe on Maple Street. The cafe was neutral territory, public enough that neither of us would make a scene. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where we could talk privately. Louis arrived precisely at 2, dressed in one of his expensive suits, though I noticed it looked slightly worn at the cuffs. He sat across from me, his expression a careful mask of contrition. Mom, he began, I want to apologize for what happened. I was under a lot of pressure, and I handled it badly. I nodded but said nothing, waiting. The thing is, he continued, fidgeting with his watch, a nervous habit since childhood. We're in a bit of a financial situation. Some investments didn't work out, and with the mortgage and Rebecca's business struggling. So Thomas was right. How bad is it? I asked quietly. Louis sighed, running a hand through his hair. Bad enough. We're behind on the mortgage. Rebecca's boutique is barely breaking even. The credit cards are maxed out. And you thought the solution was to throw your mother out? His eyes flashed with momentary anger before he controlled it. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. You could have talked to me, I said simply. You could have asked for help instead of treating me like a burden. Louis looked down at his hands. Would you have helped? The question hung between us. Would I have? After all the sacrifices I'd made, all the support I'd given, would I have helped him one more time? Yes, I said finally. I would have. That's what family does. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Then you'll reconsider? About the house? And there it was. Not remorse for how he'd treated me, but still focused on what he could get. The house is mine, Louis, I said firmly. That's not changing. His face hardened. So all that talk about family helping family was just talk? No, I replied. But help doesn't mean giving you everything while I get nothing. It doesn't mean letting you treat me like I'm worthless. Mom, I never. You did. I cut him off. And it stops now. I'll help you, but on my terms, not yours. For the first time, Louis looked at me. Really looked at me. With something like respect. What terms? He asked cautiously. I took a deep breath. This was the moment to set the boundaries I should have established long ago. First, you and Rebecca move out of my house. Louis and Rebecca began looking for an apartment while I stayed with Margaret, still not quite ready to return to the house that held so many complicated memories. I'd hired a real estate agent to help them find something within their means. Not too small, but certainly more modest than what they were accustomed to. This is humiliating, Rebecca said when we met to discuss their options. We were sitting in a realtor's office, looking at listings that matched their adjusted budget. These places are barely livable. They're perfectly fine starter homes, I replied calmly. Many couples start with much less. Rebecca's perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on the table. Louis and I aren't many couples. We have standards. I looked at my son, waiting for him to intervene, to show some understanding of their situation. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom's right, Rebecca, he finally said, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. We need to be realistic about what we can afford right now. Rebecca shot him a look of disbelief. Since when? Your mother has plenty of money to help us get something decent. Don't you, Scarlett? Her directness took me by surprise. I'd never discussed my finances with Rebecca, and Louis shouldn't have either. What makes you think that? I asked carefully. Rebecca rolled her eyes. Please. Louis told me about your secret little fortune. $2 million. And you're making us look at these. Hovels? I turned to Louis, who at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Thomas shouldn't have told you that, he mumbled. Thomas didn't, I said evenly. You accessed my financial records, didn't you? Louis's silence was confirmation enough. I stood up, gathering my purse. Mom, wait, Louis started. We'll continue this another time, I said to the realtor, who nodded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in her office. Outside in the parking lot, Louis caught up to me. Mom, I can explain. Explain what? I asked, turning to face him. How you illegally accessed my private financial information, or how you shared it with Rebecca without my permission. I needed to know what resources we had, he said defensively. After you took back the house, after you kicked me out of it, I corrected. Fine, he conceded. After that, I needed to understand our options. Your options, I emphasized. My money is not your resource, Louis. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. So what was all that talk about helping us? Was that just words? I am helping you, I said firmly. I'm helping you find an affordable place to live. I'm paying for a financial advisor, but I'm not giving you access to my savings. You haven't earned that trust. Earned? His voice rose, slightly. I'm your son. Yes, I agreed. And I love you. But love doesn't mean handing over my financial security to someone who's shown such poor judgment, both with money and with how he treats his mother. For a moment, I thought he might argue further, but something in my expression must have told him it would be pointless. He nodded curtly and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot. That evening, Margaret and I sat on her patio, glasses of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "You did the right thing," she assured me. "Setting boundaries isn't easy, especially with our children." "I keep wondering where I went wrong," I admitted. "How did my sweet little boy turn into someone who could treat me this way? Who thinks my money belongs to him by right?" Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. "You didn't go wrong, Scarlett. You were a wonderful mother. Still are. But we don't always get to decide who our children become as adults." "I enabled him," I said softly. "All those years, solving his problems, making sacrifices so he wouldn't have to. I thought I was being a good mother, but maybe I was just teaching him that his needs always came first." "Maybe," Margaret agreed, "but that doesn't make what he did right, and it doesn't mean you have to continue enabling him now." The next morning, I woke to a flurry of text messages from Louis. "Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. Rebecca was out of line. We're willing to look at those apartments again. Please call me." The last one gave me pause. "Dad would be ashamed of how you're treating me." That was a low blow, even for Louis in his current state. James had adored our son, but he'd also believed in responsibility and respect. If anyone would be ashamed, it would be James seeing how Louis had treated his mother. I called Louis, my resolve strengthened by his manipulative message. "That was unfair," I said when he answered, not bothering with a greeting. "What was?" He sounded genuinely confused. "Using your father to manipulate me. James would be heartbroken to see how you've behaved." Louis was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean it that way," he finally said, though we both knew he did. "Listen carefully," I continued. "I'm still willing to help you and Rebecca find a place and get your finances in order. But if you ever try to manipulate me like that again, if you ever use your father's memory against me, that help stops immediately. Do you understand?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Good. The realtor has 3 more properties to show us tomorrow. I'll meet you at her office at 10. I ended the call before he could respond, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and strength. This new dynamic between us was painful but necessary. For too long, I'd allowed Louis to take advantage of my love and generosity. That ended now. The next day, Louis arrived at the realtor's office, alone. "Rebecca has a migraine," he explained, though we both knew it was an excuse. We looked at 3 modest but well-maintained condos. The last one, a 2-bedroom unit in a quiet complex with a small garden, seemed to appeal to Louis. "This could work," he admitted as we walked through the sunny living room. "It's within your budget, especially with the down payment I'm offering," I said. Louis turned to me, surprise evident in his expression. "You're helping with the down payment?" I said I would help, and I meant it. I looked around the pleasant space. This place has potential. It's a fresh start. For the first time in weeks, Louis's smile seemed genuine. "Thank you, Mom." The realtor tactfully gave us a moment alone, stepping outside to take a phone call. "I've been..." Louis hesitated. "I've been unfair and ungrateful." I waited, not rushing to reassure him as I might have done in the past. "Rebecca and I, we got caught up in a lifestyle we couldn't afford. The house, her boutique, vacations. We kept thinking the next bonus or promotion would cover it all." He looked out the window at the small garden. "Then when you lost your job, I panicked. I saw our safety net disappearing." "I was never your safety net, Louis," I said quietly. "I was your mother." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." He turned to face me. I don't deserve your help, but I'm grateful for it. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. A crack in the wall of entitlement he'd built around himself. Everyone deserves a second chance, I said. Even spoiled sons who forget where they came from. Louis actually laughed at that, a short, surprised sound that reminded me of the boy he'd once been. I won't forget again, he promised. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did, but another part, the wiser part that had emerged through this painful experience, knew that words were easy. It would take time and consistent action to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Let's tell the realtor we're interested in this place, I said, changing the subject. But remember, Louis, this help comes with conditions: financial counseling, living within your means, and treating me with respect. I understand, he said solemnly. No more entitlement, no more taking you for granted. As we left the condo, walking together toward our cars, I felt cautiously hopeful. People could change, relationships could heal, but they never returned to exactly what they were before, nor should they. What Louis and I were building now had to be something new, something healthier for both of us. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. How did it go? I smiled as I typed my response. Progress, slow but real. For the first time since that terrible morning in my kitchen, I felt like I could breathe again. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but at least we were moving in the right direction. The day of the family dinner arrived with a sense of foreboding. 2 months had passed since Louis and Rebecca moved into their condo. 2 months of careful rebuilding and tentative peace. Tonight would be the first time we'd all be together in one room since everything fell apart, and I couldn't quiet the nervous flutter in my stomach. I'd chosen a neutral location, not my house, not their condo, but a private room at Giovanni's, the Italian restaurant where we'd once celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. I arrived early, inspecting the table, pulling out a chair for me. Thank you, I replied, noting how formal we'd become with each other. Like polite strangers reconnecting after years apart. Rebecca sat silently, her expression guarded. She'd been cool toward me since the condo search, clearly still resentful of the downgrade in their living situation. The spangled bracelet on her wrist, clearly new and expensive, suggested she hadn't fully embraced their need for financial restraint. Margaret arrived next, bringing her warmth and easy conversation like a gift. She'd become more than a friend through all this. She'd become my rock, my confidant, my sister in all but blood. Louis, look at you. That blue tie brings out your eyes, just like Scarlett's, she exclaimed, embracing him with genuine affection. Even Rebecca couldn't resist Margaret's charm, her posture relaxing slightly as Margaret complimented her earrings. Thomas arrived last, apologizing for his tardiness, blaming traffic with a wry smile that suggested he'd actually timed his arrival, deliberately giving us a chance to settle in. He'd been my attorney for so long that he felt like family, which was why I'd asked him to join us tonight. As the appetizers were served, conversation flowed cautiously. We discussed safe topics, the weather, a new film Margaret had seen, the food. Louis talked about his new position at work, a lateral move rather than a promotion, but one he seemed genuinely excited about. It's less pressure, but more creative. Control, he explained. And regular hours for once. I noticed he didn't mention money, a small but significant change from before, when salary and bonuses dominated his conversation about work. Rebecca remained mostly quiet, contributing only when directly addressed. Her eyes occasionally flicked to the expensive watch on Thomas's wrist or Margaret's designer handbag, a flash of something, envy, resentment, crossing her face each time. As the main course arrived, I took a deep breath. It was time. I've asked you all here tonight because I have some things I want to say and some news to share, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Louis set down his fork, his expression instantly wary. Rebecca straightened in her chair. Margaret reached under the table and gave my hand a quick, encouraging squeeze. First, I want to thank you, Louis and Rebecca, for the effort you've made these past 2 months. Moving, adjusting your lifestyle. I know it hasn't been easy. Louis nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Rebecca stared at her plate. When you told me to leave that day, Louis, it broke something in me, I continued, my voice softening despite my resolve to remain composed. Not just my heart, but my understanding of who we were to each other. Mom, I've apologized. Louis started. Please, let me finish, I said gently. This isn't about making you feel guilty. It's about being honest about where we are now. He nodded, looking uncomfortable but attentive. That day showed me that I'd been living with an illusion. The illusion that my sacrifices had created the relationship I thought we had. But relationships don't work that way. They're built on mutual respect, not just sacrifice. Thomas nodded approvingly. He'd heard me rehearse this speech, helped me find the words that were firm but not cruel. I don't regret helping you get back on your feet, I continued. But going forward, things need to be different between us. Different how? Louis asked, caution in his voice. I'm reclaiming my life, Louis. For too long, I've lived for you. Your needs, your comfort, your success. It's time I lived for myself. Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes suddenly alert. What does that mean exactly? She asked, the first full sentence she'd spoken all evening. I took another steadying breath. It means I'm selling the house. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Louis stared at me, shock evident in his expression. Selling the house? He repeated. But why? It's your home. It was our home, I corrected gently. But now it's just a house full of memories, some wonderful, some painful. I'm ready for something new. Where will you live? Louis asked, his voice tight with what might have been concern or calculation. I couldn't quite tell. I've purchased a small cottage near the coast, I said, unable to keep a smile from my face as I thought of my new home. Light-filled rooms overlooking the Pacific, a garden waiting to be planted. It's about an hour's drive from here. Coast, Louis echoed. But that's so far. It's an hour, Louis, Margaret interjected with a gentle laugh. Not another planet. Louis looked slightly abashed. Of course, it's just a change. A necessary one, I said firmly. I need space to figure out who I am now, what I want for this next chapter of my life. Rebecca's gaze had sharpened with interest. What about the money from selling the house? She asked, earning a warning glance from Louis. That brings me to my second announcement, I said, nodding to Thomas, who withdrew a folder from his briefcase. I've established a trust, I explained. Part of my estate will go to you, Louis, when I'm gone, but a significant portion will be donated to a scholarship fund for single parents returning to education, people who are working to build better lives for their children, just as I did for you. Louis's expression was unreadable. Rebecca looked like she'd swallowed something sour. The trust has conditions, Thomas added, his professional tone masking any personal feelings. Louis's portion depends on his continued financial responsibility and his treatment of Scarlett. The scholarship fund is irrevocable. You're cutting me out of your will? Louis asked, his voice strained. No, I corrected him. I'm ensuring that my legacy extends beyond just taking care of you. I'm making sure that my money reflects my values, including the value of being treated with dignity and respect. Margaret raised her wine glass slightly in a subtle gesture of approval. I don't understand, Louis said, though I suspected he understood perfectly well. Is this some kind of punishment? Not at all, I replied, maintaining my composure. It's simply me taking control of my life and my future, something I should have done long ago. Thomas slid the folder across the table to Louis. All the details are in here. I'm happy to answer any questions. Louis didn't touch the folder. And if I object? That's your right, I said calmly. But my decision is made. Rebecca's hand moved to cover Louis's on the table, a gesture that seemed more restraining than comforting. We should take time to review everything, she said, her tone carefully controlled. This is a lot to process. I nodded, expecting nothing less. Of course. As dessert was served, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the tension remained. Louis was quieter now, his earlier warmth replaced by a pensive reserve. Rebecca's smile had returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. When the evening finally ended and we stood outside the restaurant saying our goodbyes, Louis held back as the others moved toward their cars. Mom, he said quietly, are you sure about all this? I looked at my son, really looked at him, not through the lens of a mother's blind love, but with clear-eyed awareness of who he was, flaws and all. Yes, Louis, I said. For the first time in a very long time, I'm completely sure about what I'm doing. He nodded slowly, seeming to accept if not fully understand. Then he surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. I'm sorry, he whispered, against my hair. I really am. I hugged him back, allowing myself to feel both the love and the wariness that now defined our relationship. I know, I whispered back. So am I. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my coastal cottage, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The orange-pink light glittered across the water, creating a pathway that seemed to lead to some magical, distant shore. My garden was coming along nicely. Roses climbing trellises, lavender bushes attracting butterflies and bees, a small vegetable patch already producing more tomatoes than I could possibly eat. This view never gets old, Margaret said, joining me with 2 glasses of wine. She'd come for the weekend, as she often did now. No, it doesn't, I agreed, accepting the glass with a smile. The month since the dinner at Giovanni's had brought changes I couldn't have imagined when Louis first told me to leave. The sale of the house had gone smoothly, bringing in even more than Thomas had estimated. My cottage, while modest, was entirely mine, not just legally but emotionally. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every plant in the garden reflected my tastes, my choices. Have you heard from Louis this week? Margaret asked, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs I'd painted a cheerful blue. We had lunch. On Tuesday, I said, taking the matching chair beside her. When all this started, when Louis kicked you out, I was so angry at him I could barely see straight. I wanted you to cut him off completely. I nodded. Margaret had never hidden her feelings about Louis's behavior. But watching you navigate, this, setting boundaries without burning bridges, helping him without enabling him, it's been a masterclass in grace, Scarlett. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. I don't know about grace, I said. I've just been doing what feels right, one day at a time. That's exactly what grace is, Margaret insisted. And look at you now, happier than I've seen you in decades. She was right. Despite the pain, despite the difficult recalibration of my relationship with Louis, I had found a contentment that had eluded me for years. My days were filled with activities I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. Painting classes, volunteering at the local library, joining a hiking group where I'd made new friends who knew nothing of my past and accepted me simply as Scarlett, not as Louis's mother or James's widow. I'm thinking of taking that Mediterranean cruise we always talked about, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. The one where we visit Greece and Italy. Margaret's eyes widened. Really? When? September, maybe? The weather should be perfect then. Count me in, she said immediately, raising her glass in a toast. To new adventures. We clinked glasses, the sound clear and promising in the sea air. The day of the housewarming party arrived bright and perfect, as if the universe itself approved of my new beginning. I'd invited a small group, my new friends from the hiking club and painting, class, Thomas and his wife, a few neighbors who'd welcomed me so warmly to the community, and of course, Margaret. Louis had promised to come early to help set up. When his car pulled into the driveway, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. This would be his first visit to my new home, his first tangible encounter with the reality of my new life. "Mom, this is..." He paused as he stepped onto the deck, taking in the view. "Incredible." I smiled, genuinely pleased by his reaction. "It's not the biggest place, but it suits me." "It's perfect," he said, and I believed he meant it. "You can see why. They call this the Sunset Coast." I gave him a tour, the open-plan living area with its wall of windows facing the ocean, the small but efficient kitchen where I'd rediscovered my love of cooking, the guest room where Margaret often stayed, and finally my studio. "You're painting again," Louis said, surprise evident in his voice as he took in the canvases propped against the walls. Seascapes, mostly, but also a few portraits, including one of Margaret that I was particularly proud of. "I started taking classes at the community center," I explained. I'd forgotten how much I loved it. Louis picked up a small canvas showing the view from my deck at dawn, the sky streaked with violet and gold. "This is really good, Mom. I don't remember you painting when I was growing up." "I stopped when your father died," I said simply. "There was never enough time or money for something like art." A shadow crossed his face. Regret, perhaps? Or the dawning recognition of all I'd given up. "I never knew," he said quietly. "There was a lot you didn't know," I replied, not unkindly. "A lot I didn't tell you." We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by these tangible expressions of my rekindled creativity. "I'm glad you found your way back to it," he finally said. "So am I." As we returned to the kitchen to prepare for the party, Louis seemed different, more thoughtful, more attentive. He asked questions about my new friends, my routine, the classes I was taking. Real questions, not the perfunctory inquiries. Of someone going through the motions. "You seem happy here," he observed as we arranged a platter of finger foods. "I am," I confirmed. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." He nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand why you needed this. Space. A fresh start." "It wasn't just about space, Louis," I said gently. "It was about finding myself again." "I think I get that now," he said. "These past few months, working with the financial counselor, scaling back. It's been hard, but clarifying too. Rebecca and I were living someone else's life, trying to keep up with expectations that weren't even our own. This was new, this level of self-awareness from my son. And how is that going?" "Really?" He sighed, setting down the knife he'd been using to cut cheese. "Some days are better than others. Rebecca still struggles with it. She grew up with money, you know? The idea of budgeting, of saying no to things. It's foreign to her." "And to you?" I asked. "I'm learning," he said with a small smile. "That's all any of us can do, right? Learn and try to do better." The doorbell rang, announcing the first guests, and our conversation was put on hold. But throughout the evening, I watched Louis interact with my new friends, saw him genuinely engage with these people who knew me as I was now, not as I had been. There was a new respect in his eyes when he looked at me, a recognition that I was more than just his mother, more than just a support system for his life. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Louis helped me clear away glasses and plates. Margaret was staying the night, but she'd tactfully retreated to the guest room, giving Louis and me this time alone. "Thank you for coming," I said as we loaded the dishwasher. "It meant a lot to me." "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. Then, after a pause, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said at dinner that night, about your legacy and values." I waited, sensing he had more to say. I want you to know I understand now why you set up the trust the way you did. And I respect it. The Lewis of 6 months ago would have argued, would have tried to convince me to change my mind. This acknowledgement, this acceptance, was perhaps the clearest sign of how far we'd come. Thank you, I said simply. As we finished cleaning up, the conversation turned to future plans. His work project that might lead to a promotion, my upcoming cruise with Margaret, a potential visit from him at Thanksgiving. When it was time for him to leave, he hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. I should have said that a long time ago. I hugged him back, feeling the complicated mixture of love and hard-won wisdom that now defined our relationship. It's never too late to say the right things, Louis. Standing on my deck after he'd gone, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost something, the illusion of a perfect mother-son bond, but gained something far more valuable, a genuine relationship based on truth and mutual respect. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, my right to put myself first after decades of sacrifice. The future stretched before me, as vast and full of possibilities as the ocean itself. There would be more challenges, more difficult conversations, more moments